Monique, Elevate.
All right. So welcome everybody to another chat conversation episode of Moments with Mo, presented by Elect Elevation. Of course, I am your hostess, Monique McClure. And tonight I have a special guest. I call all my guests special because I really do feel like the ladies that grace my stage are just special individuals, right? But tonight we have a really special guest who we're just going to have a conversation around, overcoming adversity and also living with bipolar disorder, which I think are two things that we hear, but we don't always talk about, especially when it comes to the bipolar disorder. Sometimes people kind of shun away from it. They don't want to have that conversation. So really excited to have that conversation tonight. We have none other than Miss Tay Goodwin. She is a vision midwife. I see your title, so I'm definitely gonna get into that because I love that. But she has over 20 years in the industry of just being a business outlier and deliberately avoiding hyped up promises and instead choosing to offer real life tangible help. Oh, thank you. Thank you for offering real life tangible help. Her journey includes overcoming domestic violence, failing in business, and starting over and thriving with bipolar disorder. So thank you so very much for sharing some time with me. And I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to just voice over and add anything else to your introduction for those that are watching.
Well, Monique, I'm so excited to have this conversation, you're right. Some of the things that we're going to talk about are things that we don't get to talk about a lot in the Black community, especially, and in the entrepreneur community. So I'm a mother. I've been a single mother. I've experienced divorce. You talked about the domestic violence and a few other things in there. And there has been a lot of adversity, but there's also been a lot of triumph. And so I'm hoping that I get to share both sides of the coin with your audience tonight.
I love that. How many children do you have?
Just one.
Okay. Boy, girl?
I have a girl. She just turned 22.
Wow. Okay. We are right there. I have a 21-year-old. And then I do have two others. I have a 16 and a 7-year-old as well. But I know all about those 21 and 22-year-olds. So I'm sure you got your hands full, even as a young adult child, right? Or not child, but a young adult offspring. We'll call them an offspring. So let's just kind of jump right into it. Okay. I am curious to really hear a little bit about your journey and really hear, what made you so passionate. Usually there's a why behind what we do. What is your why as to what you share in terms of your message?
I've always wanted to help people. Even way back when I first started out in my career, I was a teacher. I wanted to teach kids because I wanted them to read. And back then I had a very different motivation than I do now, but I wanted them to read so they would be able to think and understand and all the opportunities that reading would be able to afford them. And so I've always had something in me that's wanted to help other people. And over time, it went from teaching, it went from being a corporate trainer where I was still helping, people. And then as I moved into this phase of my business, it really combined my passion for helping people, just really combined with some of the experiences and the beliefs that I had around spirituality, around mental health, around religious systems. And so my why at this point is I really want to see more people liberated. I want to see more people free to enjoy the life that they were designed to live.
I love that. I definitely love that. And you talked about, kind of morphing from being an educator and knowing that you had that desire and that passion. And I share that with you because I was an educator and I didn't want to teach in the classroom. I was teaching 4 and 5-year-olds and I was like, not really what I want to do, but I knew that I wanted to somehow give back, right, and serve, and that's exactly what it sounds like you have come to realize. So, with over 20 years of experience, tell us a little bit about your journey as it related to the part of overcoming adversity. We all go through something in life, right?
Mhm.
So we can probably all resonate with that. But what was different, or what was pivotal in your journey?
Wow. I was thinking about this the other day. I think one of the things that was pivotal for me in my journey was not being parented. And my parents and I were in very different places now, than I was growing up. But I remember having this realization that my parents didn't really know how to parent, at one point. And so there was a lot of adversity and a lot of trials and things that came out of that. And I remember when I actually when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, I was terrified because
Mm,
my first thought was, I'm not going to know how to protect her. I'm not going to know how to parent her because I haven't really seen it. So I don't really know what to do. And of
mm,
course, one of the ways we overcome that is we figure things out. I'm a big believer that no matter what's happened to you, no matter what you've experienced, we've always have the obligation and we have the responsibility to do better than what we knew. But that was like the biggest hurdle of not having those supportive parents, not having that supportive space and place to grow. And I was able to thrive without it. But there are some days when I think about, man, what a difference it would have made to have had that parental support growing up.
yeah, I am I am so right there with you. Same thing. The parental background, didn't have it. And
Mhm.
honestly, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing when I became a mom. Like, nobody put a manual in my lap and said, "Okay, here you go." So it was like on the job training.
Mhm.
Would you say the same?
Oh, absolutely. And I feel, when I look at, moms who, have their child in their teens and I can't imagine what that was like. I was 30 years old and still didn't know, right? I was still trying to figure it out. I still hadn't learned how to parent myself. I still had a lot of healing to do. And so it was a lot to really take that on. But I was always very cognizant of the fact that I know there's a different way.
Hmm.
And part of that meant that I had to overcome and I had to work through some things and get some healing right so that I could be there and be a better parent for my daughter.
You made a really good point that I didn't get that. You said you always knew there was a better way.
Mhm.
Like, what what stood out? I mean, aside from obviously the things that you didn't have, but like, what
Mhm.
stood out? Because sometimes I think when we lack something that we're hoping or that we thought we were supposed to get, we think that, this is just the way that it is. I think about the way that in my household I was talked to. And then I
Mhm.
started talking to my children in that way, but I didn't know any better until, like you say, it was just after a while, I just started to realize I sounded like the very people I didn't want to sound like.
Mhm.
What made you know that there was just a better way? Like, was that something that was just inside of you, or what made you know that?
Viola Davis said this quote in an award speech, and every time I think about it, it gives me chills because the line that she said was, "My instinct was bigger than my upbringing." And I feel that in my life, my instinct, right? So it wasn't that I saw it. It wasn't that somebody told me, but there was something in me that knew,
Yeah.
right? That was bigger than all that, what I was experiencing, that knew that there was something different. And I remember when my daughter was about 3 or 4 years old, and I was talking to a boss that I had, one of the best bosses that I've ever had in my life. And
Okay.
we were having this conversation around parenting. And I think one of the reasons we connected so much was because she had been a single mom as well. And we were having this conversation, and I told her, I said, one of the things that I've made sure that my daughter had and knew was that no matter what, she was always going to be loved and accepted no matter what. And I said, because I don't feel like I had that. And so that's one of the things that I want to make sure she gets. And it was like, that whether it was a value or whether it was just that instinct in me. But that was one of the decisions that I made early on. And I may not know how, but I'm going to figure it out because
Yeah.
she has to have that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Our stories are so right there. I completely understand. And I love that you are open enough to share like those things that you may have lacked and how you wanted to give that, in your relationship with your daughter. Two of the things that we've been talking about within Elect Elevation is healing our childhood trauma, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times I think as we become adults, especially when we become parents, sometimes we forget about that child. And you said it, you said parenting your inner child. And
Mhm.
sometimes we don't get a chance to really do that because we're busy with the kids and, making a living and doing all the things that are required just to make our children allow our children to have a better life. We forget about parenting that inner child that's also wounded and hurting and sometimes even left behind.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes we don't realize that how we can advocate for ourselves as an adult and
Mm-hmm.
advocate for the child that we were.
Yeah.
Were there years where I spent being angry and miserable and thinking that, oh, my parents didn't do X, Y, and Z? Of course, right? That's natural that you
Yeah.
would have that. But at some point, I realized that I had a choice.
Yes.
I could spend my time being angry and frustrated about what wasn't there, and then angry and frustrated because even as an adult, after years, my parents maybe still weren't responding and parenting me the way I wanted to, or I could just simply acknowledge that, that's just not going to be the nature of that relationship.
Yeah.
And the longer I kept trying to make it be how I wanted it to be and what I thought I needed, it was going nowhere until I said, I can parent myself. I can fix this. I can do this. I can heal this.
Yeah.
Right. And release that person from them trying to release that person from me trying to get them to fit into what I thought I needed.
Yeah.
And if your people who are listening to this might need to play that back a few times. But what happens is, and it's at the heart of forgiveness, right? Because forgiveness is, I'm going to hold on and I'm going to make you fit what I want you to fit. And I'm going to judge you when you don't. And what I realized was that if I'm always holding those people in that space where I think they should have fitted and where I wanted them to fit, I'm never giving them a chance to be anything else.
Ooh.
So I had to let that go and say, you know what, this is just not that relationship. And sometimes you can feel cheated because so this person had this and I deserve to have this. And you know what? Yes, you did. But guess what? You didn't. Right. Yeah. It just didn't happen. And so we can learn to let that go. We can find ways to give ourselves what I need. Did I need to have more play? Did I need to have somebody put their arms around me? I can do that for myself. I can do that for my own inner child, and I can heal that. And it doesn't have to involve the parents or the people who may have been supposed to give us that.
And we may have thought that they were supposed to give us that, but that may not have been a part of God's plan the whole time. Sometimes our parents, and as much as we would have liked to get those things, sometimes our parents were designed to give us life. And that's the best gift that they could ever give. We may not understand it then, but as we grow up and we become parents and we learn how to forgive and we're healing our inner child, we can appreciate the fact that, thank you, you gave me life. If you didn't do anything else, you gave me life, because that was also a choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
well, yeah. Well, and I also believe too that, for whatever reasons we're here now, I believe that, there's something divine about the people that we're here with. And so, at some point, as hard as it was, I actually had to in my own way, thank my parents for choosing to be who they were and how they were. Yeah. Because even if it wasn't what I thought I wanted, or even if it wasn't ideal, however they showed up and lived their lives, it brought me to the path that I'm on now. And
Yes.
I couldn't be and have had the experiences and have had the healing. And
Mm,
in this lifetime, maybe that's something that I was meant to experience. I wanted to experience, and these people played a role in that. So
yes.
whatever role they were able to play, or whatever role they divinely contributed to where I am now, I got to have some kind of gratitude for that.
Yes. 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 Ooh, 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 ooh. I keep saying ooh because you speak in my language and I get you. I understand where you are coming from. So when you think about, your childhood upbringing,
Mhm.
growing up and developing these traumas, these heart wounds is what I call them. Um, Getting married, having a child, and then going through some sort of domestic violence. When you think about the title, Overcoming Adversity,
Mhm.
tell me how that journey was for you. Where did it start? And I know that's a loaded question, but give us a glimpse into, did you have a rock bottom moment where you were just like, no, this is that, no, or was
Mm.
it a progressive thing for you that you just kind of found yourself saying, oh, okay, I've actually overcome some of those adversities.
You know what? I had a few rock bottom moments. I don't know if it was rock bottom. I've had a few bottom moments.
Okay.
I had a few moments where, I said I had to draw a line in the sand. One of them that I talk about a lot is about stepping away from traditional Christianity, like,
Mm-hmm.
and stepping all the way out of it. And that was a huge thing because I grew up in the church. I grew up like, I mean, my earliest memories are like being 3 and 4 and being spanked because I wasn't sitting still in church, So, I grew up in it and my family was entrenched in it. And so at one point, and this was a really, really low point, I just said, you know what, this doesn't work. I was looking at the things in my life. I was battling a lot of depression. I was going to church every Sunday. I was praying. I was reading. I was fasting. I was shouting. I was worshiping. I was doing all the things. I was serving. I was ministry leader. I was
Come
disciple. I was doing
on.
all the things,
Yes.
and nothing was changing.
Yeah.
And I looked around and I noticed it wasn't only me, but a lot of the women that were in my church and in other churches that I knew of that were Christian, nothing was changing for them either. And I remember this day so clearly. I threw away every Bible, and I had about 5 different Bibles because you got to have the King James, the NIV.
All of them.
You got to have all of them. I had a Thompson Chain Reference, the Concordance. I had all the books. I had, Charles Stanley books galore. Like I had all these books, and I just threw everything away. And
Wow.
I said, my prayer was, I want to know you for myself,
Yes.
because the God that I was worshiping was my mother's God
Yes.
and my grandmother's God. And that wasn't working. It didn't work for them, and it wasn't working for me. And I said, and it wasn't a rock bottom moment, but it was one of the lowest emotional points. But it also turned out to be one of the highest points, because when I made that prayer, that was one of the first times I felt a true sense of liberation. I never, because before then I remember, always that feeling of, well, maybe I'm not saved. Maybe that's why this is happening, because I'm really not saved. It's like I go up to the altar again and I got to pray again. And maybe that's why. And when I made that prayer, that I just simply want to know you for myself, that was the first time I didn't have any doubt. I didn't have any question
Yeah.
about my connection to what I called God at that time. And I call it the divine now,
Yeah.
simply because I've stepped away from the traditional Bible God as I was taught. But I didn't have that worry. I didn't have that fear for the first time in my life.
Yes. Totally understand that. Before we had this, I think you and I were having a conversation before, and I was telling you, I get that. I understand. When we grow up in church, when we grow up with these mindsets and these ideologies and these principles that are passed down to us, at some point you got to take inventory and say, does this belong to me? Is this something that I believe, or is this something that was put on me to believe, and then I started to adapt my life according to other people, right?
Yeah.
But I have a question. So it doesn't sound like you turned your back on God. It
Mhm.
sounds like you turned your back on the this is not even a real word, but I'm gonna say it, the superficiality of
Mhm.
religion. But why did you throw your Bible away?
Because the Bible wasn't adding up for me.
Okay.
After the verses, the scriptures, and coming from a place of abuse. And this is one of the things that I found really hard. Coming from a place of abuse and sexual abuse and those kind of things, there were some passages in the Bible that I just like, this doesn't make sense.
Okay.
And when I looked at certain stories, I think one of the ones that has always haunted me was the story of David's daughter, who was raped by her brother. And in the story, David doesn't console his daughter. David's words are, "Oh, my poor son, my poor son." And that haunted me for so long, that this, as the Old Testament positions David as this worshiper, even though he has some other issues too, right? But this worshiper who God loved, and he loved God. And it wasn't David that stood up for his daughter. It was the brother.
The brother.
That came in. And that was just one of the things that when I started to take a look at some of the stories about how women, were depicted, especially around areas that, connected to rape and to abuse, I was just like, yeah, it's not working for me. And I can't make the stories work. And so if I can't make the stories work, but I still believe in God, I'm going to trust that you're going to show up. Because if you are who you say you are, you're going to show up no matter what book I'm looking at.
Because of your
show
relationship, up. Right? Because of your relationship.
Right. And my prayer is sincere. And I've heard, and I've got people that are saying, well, you just wanted to do what you want to do. This had nothing to do with sin. I wanted to go drink. I wanted to go pray. It had nothing to do with any of that. I desperately wanted, if all the things that I'm believing in, and I'm putting all of my faith and trust in this, but I'm looking at my life and I'm not seeing the receipts. There's something's not working here. Now, if it's me, I'll own it.
Right.
I'll fully
but
own
God
it.
show me that, and I'll take that conviction if that's the case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what it was. So it was throwing it away because I was going to start. Let's just start. And it's so funny because years later, I was still holding on to that. I was still, I was trying to find churches, especially once my daughter was born, because I'm like, well, I don't want to let her, not have any God, in her life. So I really want to do that. That didn't work out. It even to the point, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was still holding on to the Bible, God, and trying to make peace with that. And I attended a Why Jesus conference. Now I pulled money out of my own pocket. Traveling across states, hotel, full, everything, because I wanted answers. I wanted the connection. I wanted to work. And I went to a Why Jesus conference, and I came away saying, you know what, I still can't make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you threw your Bible away, you got deep in God, and your relationship, being able to really hear from God directly without all of these other things, right? Mm-hmm. What was the guidance that he gave in order for you to overcome things like domestic violence and abuse, which are deeply rooted, embedded things that sometimes keep people stuck? How did he guide you through that?
Well, I need to acknowledge that I don't consider God a he.
Okay, that's fair, because I struggle with that too. The whole he.
Yeah. And a lot of us do. And it took me a while to figure out the language. Like I remember the first time when I said, I don't believe this anymore, and somebody sneezed, I was like, who blesses you? Like, do I say God bless you? Right. Or, when you're in a jam and, you say Jesus, like, who do you say? Like, so I know the journey of that language and finding it out. But what started to happen was, it'll be a little bit hard to explain, but if anybody's ever experienced this, you'll know. I was telling my brother this the other day, a little while ago, that I remember meditating / praying, whatever I wanted to call it at that time, but just trying to be in communion connection. Yep. And there was an inner audible, right? That said, what if we've never seen you as anything but whole? And it shook me in a positive way. Like even now, like I feel that like the misty eyes coming on, because all I could think about was, as women, you're born a sinner, you're unrighteous, you're unholy. God had to do all this stuff just so you could be in his presence. and we're taught that that's how the person that created us sees us as unholy, sees us as so unworthy. And I thought about what would it have done for so many women? What would it do have done for me if from the moment I was aware of it, I believed that my creator only saw me as whole? My whole self-esteem, my whole way of approaching life would have been different. And so it was those kinds of experiences that started to happen. And then I started to take a look at, okay, well, what are some other ways to heal? Right. And it took me from, and here's another thing that it did, Monique. It took me from waiting to be rescued by God.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta pray, and then God will come in and he'll make the depression go away, and he'll take away this fear, he'll take away this longing, he'll take away this, and oh, I'm praying, please, please, please. It took me out of that into, okay, what are some other modalities that I can use to heal? Let's talk about therapy. Let's talk about medication. Let's talk about tapping. Let's talk about meditation. Let's talk about all these other ways. And I was diagnosed with bipolar depression at the end of my divorce. I got through a really bad divorce, and I didn't tell anybody. I literally would take my daughter to school. I had checked myself into a day treatment program for depression, and I would go there, and I would be there all day. And then I would go pick her up from school. And I did that for about 6 weeks. I didn't tell anybody, like nobody knew, but I knew there was something that was not right. And that's when they diagnosed me and, went through all that. And I took medication for a number of years. I have not taken medication in the last 3.5 years.
Wow.
But it's been because of the healing work. And the medication was a great help. It helped me get through some fog. It helped me get through some of the fatigue of depression. But I learned some other ways to address and to ways to think about things. And I'll tell you one other thing that was really big for me. And I'm hoping and I know this is going to connect with some of your audience. All the time when I was praying and God never answered my prayer to help me with the depression or heal the emotions of what I was feeling or take this weight off of me, or even a suicide ideation. Like, this isn't like me praying to ask God for a husband or praying me to ask God for money. This is stuff that's related to my life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would think, well, there's something wrong with me. Or as I was told from church people, it's because it's because of God's glory. He's got a plan for his glory. Or because, God knows you can bear it. And he never gives you more than you can bear. And so I'm thinking all of this is me and it's on me. And the minute I started coming to terms with, it's not because God is trying to test me. He's not answering because he's trying to get his glory. It's not him ignoring my prayers, right? Because, he's got some great plan and he knows that I can bear it. What if he simply doesn't exist the way they told us he exists?
Okay.
That changed everything for me, because then it wasn't about me waiting for him and him not answering. It became, okay, no. If he's not there the way they told us he's there, that means there must be something else. Because this healing, this journey, this path that I'm on, this is working. Like I'm healing. I'm learning how to have different relationships. I'm learning how to see people differently. I'm learning how to forgive.
Yeah. Yeah.
The forgiveness that I had for my parents had nothing to do with anything I learned with the Bible.
Yeah.
And everything with how I learned to start really seeing other people and realizing that, they did the best they did with what they had.
Yeah. And I think to add to that, when I think about my own journey, and I want to get to the disorder in just a second, but when I think about even just my own journey, I realized that, first of all, God is not up there and we're talking to the sky. God lives in me, right? But
Yeah.
I'm also equipped. I'm equipped to move myself into spaces and places that help me heal, that help me to tap into the voice, the inner guidance that really help to like you say, liberate my life. I've gone through a lot of trauma, as it sounds like you have. And like you in church, hurt by many church folks. I call them church folk on purpose. Many church folks. I was
Mhm.
hurt after hurt after hurt. And while I learned how to forgive, sometimes it took a while. Like it took like years to really
Mhm.
go through the process of forgiving. And I tell people all the time, you know, when you've forgiven somebody, when you can see them and that thing doesn't rise up in you, or you
Yeah.
not want to cuss them out, or it takes you back to the, you know, events that put you in that place. But
Mhm.
as I was going through my healing, I felt more liberation in my sacred space with my time listening, not just praying, because in church they don't teach you how to meditate.
They don't.
They say that the Bible, and it does, it says pray and meditate, right? Well, we know how to pray because we saw it. They didn't teach
Mhm.
us how to meditate. Meditation for me is one of my most powerful tools when it came to healing, when it
Yeah.
came to being able to see myself, being able to even see the little girl that was still trapped from being 8 years old and still hurt. It was
Mhm.
those things that I feel like I was equipped with. Nobody gave that to me. Nobody put this in my hand and said, here you go, Monique, this is your manual for forgiveness. No.
Yeah.
I went to church. I prayed. I did all the things that I thought I could do. But I love what you said a few minutes ago. And that is, I was taught that I wasn't good enough. Nobody ever
Mhm.
said that to me. They didn't say that. And
Right.
people did the best that they could, and I'm grateful for that. But when I
Mhm.
really run it down and I really think about where my biggest struggles came from and why I didn't feel like I was good enough, it was because everything that I had been taught subconsciously programmed me to think that I wasn't good enough. And so it was even hard for me to just change that dialogue in my
Mhm.
mind to no, I actually am good enough. And I actually am worthy. And I do deserve the most amazing life. I didn't even know how to envision that. I
Yeah.
did. It took a long time for me to really grasp that and understand
Mhm.
what that actually meant. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's huge. I mean, we're taught, and the language sounds so simple, right? God doesn't make mistakes. And then you sit back and you look at the abuse or trauma you've experienced, and you're like, "What? How is this not a mistake?"
yeah,
And that was some of the things that crushed me, right? Like, how is this right? How is this not a mistake?
yeah,
How is this your perfect plan for me? Right. And why does your perfect plan for me involve this? But when I look at other people's life, their perfect plan doesn't involve any of it. And
yeah,
then it got back to that saying, well, it's because God knew you could bear it. And I remember, I had this conversation with my mom, you know, and, I remember and this was something that really put a wall up for a minute, because she said, well, God knew that you could bear it. He never gives you more than you can bear. And I said, so you're telling me I need to pray to a God who looks at two people and says, you can bear being abused and you can't. And I said, as a parent, that's like having two kids. One of them, you say, you can't handle it, so I'm going to give you everything that you need. And to the other one, I'm going to beat the hell out of you because you can handle it.
yeah. And so
I can't make that work.
I will say, I deviate a little bit from the notion of, I do believe that there are things that, you know, even I say, like, the 20-year-old me could never walk a mile in my shoes. Never. Like,
Mhm.
we did it, right? But she could never. But
Mhm.
I do know that a lot of the things that I've experienced in my life, I didn't choose them. I didn't want them. I wouldn't have signed up for it. But those are the very things that have now brought me to a place where, out of the ashes, I
Mhm.
have been able to rise and serve other people that have gone through or will potentially go through some of those same experiences. And
Mhm.
that, to me, is where I find solace in the purpose. Like, I
Mhm.
know that that's not something I would have asked for, but because that was, and that's not to make any light
Oh yeah.
anything that you or anyone else, especially when it comes to domestic violence and abuse and all of
Mhm.
that, it's not to make light of it, but it is to say how I found peace in a lot of the things that I went through. Because, like you, I was like, why does this have to be me? All of my
Mhm.
friends have, not two parent, but they at least they had their mom. If they didn't
Mhm.
have their dad, they at least had their mom. Or why did I have to be exposed in this way? Or why did I have to go through this thing? And I realized that there's definitely a purpose. There's a reason, and it's not for me. It's bigger than me. It would never be for me. It's for the people that I help. And sometimes I don't even know that I'm helping them until they come back and say, man, just your story alone helped me get through my
Mhm.
experience. And for that, I'm grateful. I can't say why. I can't pinpoint back to the, to the assignment that was given to my life.
Mhm.
I don't know. But what I
Yeah.
do know is that it happened. There was purpose. And now I get to use that purpose and I get to serve women, mostly
Mhm.
men too, but women in their trauma and in
Yeah.
their healing journey. So
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to get it out.
Yeah, and I think that's just life. I think, we've been taught to ascribe it to, oh, it's the devil and it's this and it's that. It's life. I think within each of us, we have light and dark and good and bad.
There you go.
And so, anybody can have, like we all have both of those things. And there are some people that do some really messed up stuff. It does not mean, though, that that was God's way of punishing. That was God's way of giving you, putting this on you so that you could do X, Y, and Z. Because I think that, like, I've heard that a lot too. Well, you went through this so that you could help some other people. But if you believe in God as who He says He is, none of us should. If Jesus paid it all on the cross, none of us should have to go through something just to help somebody else. There's got to be other ways that can happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's just life. We're humans. Some of us are really not good people. Some of us make some really bad decisions. And that's all it is. Now, what we choose to do with who we are is another story. If we're eligible, if we're able to make decisions that allow us to heal and grow, then we should do that. And then we should help other people do that same thing. That's how we thrive and live and evolve as humans. But it doesn't mean that you know, it doesn't mean that, somebody is evil and bad and they're always going to be that way and they always have to be that way. We
Yeah.
get to choose, we get to grow. And that's one of the things that I'm grateful of, is being able to understand it, because that's one of the things that helped me forgive, right?
Yes.
You did some jacked up stuff. Now, if you continue to do jacked up stuff, I'm going to separate myself from you.
Correct.
But anybody can do something jacked up or messed up or make a bad decision. What do you choose to do next is the
Yeah.
question.
I think I want to do some sort of conversation live around what you just said a few minutes ago, and that is light and darkness. We don't talk about that enough. In many instances, we only want to talk about the light, right? We only want to talk about the good. We only want to in ourselves. But
Mhm.
just like you said, there is in every single one of us, there is light and there is darkness.
Yeah.
There is a tendency for good and there is a tendency for bad. But I don't think that people really understand how to acknowledge and even coexist with the darkness that's inside of all of us. The shadow is really
Mhm.
what it is that's inside of all of us. So I wrote that down because I'm really gonna sit with that. That may be a conversation in the future. But I really
Mhm.
want to get into your the bipolar disorder.
Mhm.
You said that they diagnosed you when you were going to your to the rehab,
And the treatments, yeah.
the
Mhm.
treatment center, the treatment
Yeah.
center.
Mhm.
What type of things took place to go into that diagnosis for them to say you may have this disorder?
Well, at that particular place, they took a look at the history of, the emotional depression. They ask a lot of questions. They do a lot of intake. They take, there's the, what is it called? The DM4, that whole book that outlines, the different symptoms that you have. And I had a lot of the symptoms, and it wasn't just the depression where, you have mild depression where you're, fatigued or you're tired, but there was some ups and there were some downs, right? There were some highs and there were some lows. There would be the manic, phases where I'm not sleeping and I got a bunch of ideas and I'm doing that, and I'm talking really fast. And then we would have these low lulls where, there were some times where I would be almost catatonic, and it was really, really devastating, because on one level, I know that there's something wrong because this is not how I normally function. But on the other level, the emotional fatigue of it and the tiredness and just the sheer emotion of, the not wanting to do anything was crippling. And I remember in one of my even before I did that, I had been in counseling, before, and the counseling had been for depression. And I remember one of the things from this book called, what is it, Feeling Good, I think, by Burns, and it's about behavioral psychology. And he talked about, if you're in that place where you can't do anything, just the movement of tearing a sheet of paper can change physiology, because that whatever the chemicals release when you do an action, even if it's just as simple as tearing paper, it can trigger a physiological response. And that's the thing I think people don't always understand about depression, because there are times now when I get into a depressive space and people are like, well, you're not sad or you're not blue. It's not about being sad. You can have be physiologically depressed, where it's hurting in your body, where you're fatigued, where you're not able to sleep. Like, you can have all these other symptoms. And I remember thinking, like, at one time, I'm like, well, I'm not crying all the time. Like, there's nothing for me to be sad about. How am I depressed?
Yeah.
And it is a physiological, it's not just emotional. There's a physiological side to this. And that's one of the things that I wish that more people, especially in churches, understood. Because just because you see somebody worshiping and praying, just because you see somebody behind a pulpit, and they are appearing that they're touched by God and they're anointed, doesn't mean that their emotional, mental health is in a good place. And if we recognize that, and we gave people the latitude to actually talk about that, we would have so much less manipulation and abuse and hurt in the churches. And it's not because it's the pastor, but what I believe happens is it trickles down. When we have these experiences of church hurt, and so many people have this church hurt because of the experiences that we've had in the people, it's not just that it's the people, it's trickling down from the people that are in leadership, and that energy, it's a whole vibe. But you have to, and it's one of the reasons why I talk about the myth of purpose. I think a lot of times we've been taught that our purpose is always connected to other people. I don't believe that. I think that's one of the ways that we get in trouble, because we make our purpose serving other people without doing the work to heal ourselves.
Oh, girl.
Our purpose is to become the best version of ourselves that we can. Because if I do that work, then everybody wins. And then when I'm serving, I'm not serving with this need to manipulate and control, because I'm healed. I'm not leading from the pulpit and I'm going to molest and I'm going to hurt other people because I haven't healed this stuff, but I'm still serving. No, you're going to be healed and you're going to be whole. And so when you're working out of that overflow of wholeness, everybody else around you benefit. But we haven't been taught that. We've been taught that your purpose is to serve other people, and we make that the priority, but we never get to the healing and we never get to the wholeness.
So this feels like a part 2 is coming, because girl, I got so much to say about that, but I want to just take a step back. I wrote a couple things down, but before I even ask the question that I want to ask, tell us meaning whomever is watching and whoever will watch the recording. And by the way, if you are watching, thanks for joining. And we are having a juicy conversation. But tell us what, in your words, what bipolar disorder actually is.
So bipolar disorder means that you literally can go from one to the other, right? One extreme to the other. You can have the really, really low depression where you can't get out of bed, you can't move, you don't want to eat, you don't want to do anything. And then the other side of that is where, like I said, I would be up, not being able to sleep, got a bunch of ideas. I'm going to read all these books. I'm going to do all these puzzles. I'm going to do all these things. I would notice that my speech would be rapidly increase. One of my triggers is spending sprees. So peep this. if you get, you know, and I know so many people that experience this and they don't connect the dots to it, but all of a sudden you have just spent thousands of dollars on Etsy, on Amazon, on all these things. And then 3 or 4 days later, you're down in the pits and you're depressed and you're low, not realizing that that's a cycle that you just went through.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to do this. And you have these thoughts of grandeur and I could do this and I could do this. And that's how things would be. And then we would hit this low lull.
Yeah.
And then we have this time where everything's like kind of medium and even.
Yeah.
And you go through these phases and these cycles. And what will happen is we'll think it's normal. And especially in the Black community, one of the things, what do we say? Oh, that's just, oh, you know, that's just how she is. Oh, that's just how they are. No, that's not just how they are. Right. You know, 1 minute they're, you know, and I hate to keep talking about the church, but we see it there a lot. 1 minute they're up at the altar and they're doing all this stuff in the church. The next minute they've been wiped out with alcohol because they're trying to self-medicate depression and they ain't been in church for 3 weeks, for 6 weeks, for 6 months. Then they're going to come back. And we know, and we see all these things and we'll just talk about, oh, well, that's just how they are. No.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this is everybody. Like, don't,
Right,
you know,
right.
It's not a blanket statement, but what I do want to say is that if that is something that you're experiencing, there is another way where you don't have to be subjected to the highs and the lows and self-medicating, and whether you're self-medicating with food, drugs, alcohol, sex, spending, people. Those are all ways that we try to self-medicate. You know, I've been in that place where, oh, I can't be by myself. I need to have, that's an addictive behavior. Where you have to be with somebody and you can't be by yourself. And it's one of the ways that we medicate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I think what I love about what you said is that, what did you say that just jumped out to me? One, I think this is a conversation that does not get enough exposure, right? Because if we are all honest, we can probably all pinpoint some of those cycles in our lives. You mentioned depression. There was a time that I realized I was depressed. And it was very much like you. I wasn't crying. I wasn't, you know, I wasn't doing all of the exterior things that would say depression. But when I started listening to the description of depression, it was like, oh my gosh, I think that I suffer from depression. And that's what I was going to say. What I love about what you said is that you said you're not taking any medication right now.
Yeah.
And that because you've gone through the healing, which I believe in so many ways, if we would just focus our attention on the four fingers that are pointing back at us when we do this, right? There are so many things that we could overcome in our lives just by focusing on healing and doing the work to let go and release and forgive. You got people walking around with anxiety. You've got people walking around with all of these medicines and doing all these things to, like you said, medicate themselves, when a lot of that is not even necessary. If you would just be courageous enough to be open to the idea that perhaps there's some things that you need to heal.
Yeah, that's so true. And you know, one of the things I think about a lot is that a lot of the things that we're depressed about, especially when you've been through some trauma and you've been through some abusive things. What I learned about me is that a big portion of that depressed was a learned response and behavior.
Yeah.
Right? Because you learn to suppress yourself. You know, like one of the things, as you know, in abusive situations, especially when you are dealing with that as a child, we internalize it and we learn to put other people's needs above our own. Right. So my safety wasn't the priority. It was pleasing other people was the priority. And so when you live your life that way into adulthood, it's going to cause some major depression. And so once you begin to solve that and realize, oh, wait a minute, you mean my only goal isn't to do what other people want me to do? You mean I can have these emotions and these thoughts and these experiences outside of other people? And that lifts some of that weight of the depression of trying to live your life in a way that we were never really designed to live. And so I know for me, a lot of that healing work, it lessens some of the depressive pattern. But one of the things to realize is that when we experience trauma, and there's science behind this stuff, and I'm not the science person on this, but I've been really fascinated by this. But what starts to happen is those things affect us in our DNA, at the level of our DNA and at the level of our core cells and molecules, because we take in that trauma. And our body starts to adapt to it for survival. That's how we've survived and evolved as people. We experience a trauma, so now our body starts to adapt to it. And so generations come, and we've adapted to this because we are trying to protect ourselves. And so that way that we have of protecting ourselves, and this is one of the things that was really a pivotal thing for me, the things that I put in place as a child to protect myself, I don't need those now.
Yeah.
I don't need those now. But I had to learn that. I had to unlearn some things that were I put in place to protect myself. Right? I don't need that now because I can voice what I want to say. Right? I'm not in a corner somewhere. I'm not afraid of being separated. And that alleviated a lot of the depression for me because it was so tied to that trauma. But again, if you're not taught to heal it, if you're taught to praise it or pray it away, and nobody ever shows you how or gives you the space to start really doing the healing work, you are always going to go in that up, down, dopamine effect of praise and worship and never really get the healing. And I need to say this too. What we have to remember is that the healing work that we do is not just for us. Especially if you have children, that same energy that you have lived your life in, that same energy that you've birthed your child through.
Yeah. Yes.
It's I've said this in my journal the other day. I said that this liberation is not just for you, but it's for the legacy that comes behind you.
Absolutely. 100% agree. 100%. So in the last couple of minutes, this has been such a great conversation. I really do think that I would love to do a part 2 because we probably have scratched the surface, to be honest with you. And I hope that this conversation is helping other people, if nothing else, to identify that, oh my gosh, there's some work that I need to do, and I probably need to do it sooner than later. But in the last couple of minutes that we are here, I want you to share, how are you serving at this, in this capacity? When I say serving, I mean, what is your give back? What is your business? What do you do to help serve? And how can people, how can they find you? How can they reach out to you?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, for that, Monique. I really appreciate that. So this year, one of the things that I committed to is I want to help more women in particular be free and be liberated. And so I've started doing more coaching around this. And my gift has been as what I call a vision midwife. Like you see the title up on the screen. One of my very first clients, she said, you have the ability to see people beyond where they are. Right. And that's what I get to do, holding my clients to help them see beyond where they are and creating a space for them to come fully into themselves authentically. And so I do a lot of coaching around that now. And also those people that are already in that space, but they've got some limitations about being visible. Right? Because that's what this affects. Right. I want to share. I want to talk more about this. I want to speak up. And so I've been doing work around helping people find their voice, be more visible, and sharing their story, because the stories is how we help other people heal. It's not about blaming. It's not about telling, I'm going to tell it all. That might have been with the Sally Jessica, whatever her name was, way back, the Donahue shows back in the day. Yeah. But for a lot of us now, it's a way to help others find their own path and heal. And I think we get to do that. So that's the way that I'm serving now. I've got a podcast called Girlfriend Get Free, where we're having people come on and talk about their own liberation journey, how they stepped away from, what I call sacred shackles, to find their own path. And I've got some writings that are coming, along those lines as well. You can find me at tygoodwin.com is the website, but I'm also on Facebook and I'm also on Instagram. Ty Goodwin, you can find me there talking about these topics. And I know sometimes it makes people feel uncomfortable, but I'd rather have uncomfortable conversations that are going to help people get free than to keep my mouth shut and watch people be in bondage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I thank you so very much. Like, I almost feel like I just needed to take that exhale because this is such a great conversation. And like I said, I think that there's a part 2 to this. So we're going to have a conversation after we're done with this. But I thank you so much for being a guest. I thank you for being so open and sharing your journey, sharing your trials and your triumphs, right? Overcoming the adversity in your life and living with bipolar disorder, being able to educate people on what that actually means. So thank you very, very, very much. For those who are watching, again, thank you all for joining. If you catch the replay, type replay in the chat so I know that you were here. If there was anything that resonated with you, feel free to leave those comments in the chat. DM, you can always DM me if you want to have a conversation further. But thank you so very much. And you all have a wonderful night. Do you have any closing remarks that you want to share?
I really appreciate you having the courage to have this conversation. And I appreciate the work that you're doing, because more of us need to tell our stories and share and have this level of transparency. So I'm so excited that our paths have connected, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much. Let me make sure that there are no comments in the chat. All right. Well, have a good night, and I will see you on the next episode of Moments with Mo. Have a good night. Bye.
Always, sis. Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like this video, do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe button. And if you don't want to miss out on any of my latest content as it's being released, go ahead and hit the notification bell icon as well. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.